Well, this is another fine time to bring the IFBTA together with one of our members in a Meet Our Member video. And I have the pleasure of having a conversation today with Jon Kelly, the Chief Revenue Officer of Mako Networks, who is an industry supporter of the IFBTA. So, Jon, welcome to Tech Bites and the IFBTA.
Thank you, Rob. Great to be here. We really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, this is the second time actually that Mako has been on, but I keep seeing you guys everywhere, especially not just because of the IFBTA, but we see you at a lot of the convenience store and petroleum types of areas, but also more and more in the restaurant types of areas. So I thought maybe you'd give an introduction to yourself and then also Mako Networks and especially your interest in the food service industries.
Absolutely, yeah. So I've been with Mako Networks for a few months now, but have known of them for a long time. I have extensive experience working in the retail petroleum space, spent some time with ExxonMobil, built a technology company in the area, and often would bump into Mako Networks from a sort of just customers would be using them and would be happy with them. Recently joined them, because I saw a lot of potential in what they were doing. But Mako is a company that builds a high performance, high security networking solution for really tailored to the needs of distributed retail enterprises. And I think more and more what we're seeing in this space is demand for high performance, high security networking solutions as cybersecurity becomes an increasing concern. There's more and more vulnerability. There's more and more connectivity between different applications that vendors are using in order to stay competitive. And people need to incorporate technology into their business operations in order to be competitive out there in the market. And we're pleased to help them do so securely and reliably. Mako was founded in 2001 in New Zealand. Historically, the company has been heavily involved in the retail.
You don't sound like you're from New Zealand, though.
I'm not from New Zealand. I was born a little bit closer to the States in London, but we do still have some boots on the ground over in New Zealand, although the company's now based these days in the Chicago area. But yeah, company has extensive experience working in the retail petroleum space where the brands, the Chevrons, the BPs, the ExxonMobils of the world have to approve networking solutions for their branded wholesalers and retail operators to use at their facilities. It's a very similar model to what we see with the brands and then franchisees in the QSR space. And what we've seen over the years is as there's an increasing focus on food service in the retail petroleum space, there's kind of been this pull for our solution into the QSR.
Well, isn't that a natural pull, though? Because if you think about it, I know you keep saying retail petroleum space, but when I think about that space, I think about convenience stores.
Yep.
And how many, should I say petrol stations? How many petrol stations? There you go. See, I got to adapt. Have both a C store. I mean, they used to have, mini markets in there, but now they're really full-fledged C stores. And where that particular industry is going, especially with EV in there and needing other things to do if you're going to be charging up an electric vehicle, we see so many partnerships with food service, especially QSR, that it would be a natural for you. Plus, we look at how many units some of those, I think somebody like Shell has like 36,000 units or something like that. So it's extremely similar.
Absolutely. Yeah. What we're seeing is this increasing focus on food service because it's, the old kind of Cokes and smokes model of the gas station where you come in, you fill up your car, you buy some cigarettes, maybe a lottery ticket if you're feeling lucky. That's not really as a competitive enough model these days. I think consumers are demanding, higher quality food, healthy food, all that sort of stuff. And it has been this shift of moving from just a place where you go in and you get your convenience items to somewhere where you can get a decent meal as well. And like you said, EV, I think the jury's still out on where that's all going in terms of its, how it folds into the gas station world. But there certainly has been this focus on, turning gas stations into more of sort of community hubs, and a lot of community revolves around food. And so what we're seeing is our customers tend to build out a stronger food service offering in order to be competitive. There's good margin in there for them and all that.
And that food, by the way, is more than because I've gone to enough NACS shows. So that food's more than pizza, hot dogs on rollers, beef jerky, chicken,
yeah, exactly.
24-hour shots.
Totally.
And so it's a little bit more than that today because it really is the crossover of fresh food or freshly prepared foods, and even as a destination point for pickup and delivery, you got to get in there. But what I was thinking about, something that you said at the very top, and I don't want to miss this nuance, is you were talking about distributed networks.
Hmm.
And, if we talk about a distributed network, you know, controlling that network, especially when you have licensees or franchisees, as you've just pointed out, there's a security issue there. And it is the responsibility not only of the brand, but also of the licensees, franchisees, management companies as well. So, how do you exactly pull together and provide that secure capability across a distributed network?
Absolutely. And I think it's absolutely essential for these distributed retail enterprises who are processing payment data constantly throughout the day to have the right infrastructure and network in place to do it securely, for their consumers, for themselves, for the brands that they represent, all simultaneously. We've been very thoughtful with the way that we've architected our networking solution in order to minimize any potential entry points from bad actors. And without getting into all the sort of technical details of how it works, we've really prioritized that and made it central to everything so that we can eliminate these endpoints that do present vulnerabilities on networks. And as we're seeing increasing adoption of technology, you've got increasing number of potential endpoints that someone could hack into if you're not managing them securely. And so centralizing everything through one system that provides a brand authorized, and the brands, they take the testing and approving of networking solutions extremely seriously. And so we really have to run through the gauntlet in order to gain those levels of approval. But for them, it's very important to have the payment and loyalty processing very, very tight, so that then the retail operator themselves can manage all of the payment that they see at their individual facilities. But at the same time, you've got to think about the operator on the ground and the different solutions that they may wish to deploy that the brand isn't necessarily concerned about, but also could represent potential cybersecurity threats for them. And so we've created the ability for a single piece of equipment to provide the networking security for both the brand level and the site level.
But it's
With
also very easy for them too, right? It's almost like a plug and play
totally.
when they send it out. I mean, you make it easy for the operator side of it to actually turn on the system and get going, especially when they're doing new units and upgrading.
Absolutely. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is this concept of zero touch provisioning, where the equipment shows up, it's already been designed with the templates that both the brand approves and the operator approves, and you simply just plug it in, install it, and then you're up and running and good to go.
So if you have a lot of, I mean, when we think about integration and interfaces and all of the different applications that are used in a QSR environment, or any restaurant or retail environment. There's so many today, especially because people are buying software as a service,
Mhm.
and the model of everything being in the cloud, which in the old days at least you could be secure down at the unit level. But
Right.
now you have, as you point out, those constant transactions going back and forth. So how do you actually monitor, control, and then take care of notification when there may be issues?
Yeah, so well, it's actually an interesting point that you bring up, and it segues nicely into a relevant sort of industry-wide topic, which is the PCI 4.0 regulatory update, which is rolling out actually this month here in March. And one of the big things that's a focal point of that is ensuring that both human users who are logging into software systems, as well as what they call NHI, non-human interfaces, meaning APIs, different application scripts that are running, have the same level of security and authentication, so that you don't end up with, in this very interconnected sort of digital world that we live in, bad actors coming in from places that you haven't managed. And so we've created automated, we tried to build in automated sort of security monitoring and reporting and all of that type of stuff to the extent possible, because QSR operators have a lot on their plate to begin with. The last thing they want to have to do is to go in and manually do a bunch of stuff in order to maintain compliance. Now they understand that the compliance is there for their best interests, but it's sort of
They may understand the compliance is there, but the franchisees don't always
absolutely,
necessarily understand that because they view it as a plug and play. How come I can't plug and play like I do at home? And it's
absolutely,
just not as simple as that, right? And
yep.
at the same time, standards. which, I know you guys are participating in RTN and you've got Connexus in the
Yep.
C-store industry, but there's no one set of standards either, even when you're talking about compliance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's different levels of standards within different industry segments that you're looking into, and it's very difficult for owner operators to keep on top of that, which is why we consider it important to build and bake as many of kind of the compliance requirements into the solution as possible to just allow them to focus on what they're doing, which is keeping their customers happy.
So, well, we talked. Can we just maybe focus a little bit on some very specific examples or some use cases that you've seen within the food service industry? Maybe even some lessons learned from from your retail, retail petroleum background, that maybe are coming that we don't think about, because you have a different kind of experience and viewpoint on this individually and also as a company.
Yeah, well, I think there's a few things that are worth mentioning. So the retail petroleum environment, to start there, since that's Mako's background and my background, is a very complex payment environment. If you think about a QSR, you've got basically one or maybe a couple of payment points at that checkout register where people are paying for their food. At a gas station, you've got all the pumps that are outside that each have a PIN pad on, that's each processing a credit card, as well as what's happening inside the store as well. So it creates this level of complexity that's going on. You've also got other equipment that's very important to monitor and manage from, you mentioned compliance, from a compliance standpoint, whether it's their underground storage tank system.
There's a lot of regulations, a lot of different
Regulation.
kinds of regulations.
Exactly. And so what we've been able to do is to really make our name in a highly complex environment with all this different processing infrastructure that's required. And then certainly a QSR environment is by no means a simple environment, but there are maybe a couple fewer sort of points of complexity than what we've seen in the retail space on the petroleum side. But what you will often find in the QSR space is you may have your front desk there where people are checking out, but then you've got your back office and people are running they're daisy chaining different switches together and all of this. And so what we pride ourselves on is providing simplicity and visibility down to the port level so that you can basically monitor and manage your entire networking equipment from one central place. And we've been able to practice that in the very complex petroleum environment. And now what we're seeing is we're able to deploy that in the QSR space. And
The interesting thing is a number of the points that you just made in the petroleum, and I know that people in the restaurant industry now realize this, especially because of all the new touch points that they have with the guest. And as I started to think about it, you gave the example of pay at the pump, and you've got the readers there, and then you got the regulations. Well, go into a lot of restaurants today, especially in QSR, and you go into a McDonald's and they've got all the kiosks
yep.
that are there. So
Oh, exactly.
kiosks, pay at the pump, they got readers on them. Got it. Okay. Hotels too, by the way, do that. And So maybe the lessons learned and the experience that Mako Networks is bringing to this particular industry is really where our industry is headed going forward. They may not have drive-through over there, which is another touch point,
Yeah.
but we start to see that convergence there. But we're ending up being much more complex with the total number of places that we
Totally.
have pickup, people coming in, taking
Yep.
credit cards, cashless.
Well, that's exactly right. You don't have to worry only about your individual on-site network. You've got to worry about online orders that are coming in from outside and making sure that the connectivity between those different systems where you're accepting orders is continuing to work. So you've got your local network and then your wider area network. Both need to continue to operate so that you don't drop
And that
the order.
wider area network, I mean, I think the days of 10 tablets out at the front desk are gone now for taking reservations or online orders.
Yeah.
But you still might end up with 3 different systems out there. Most people have the big 3 in there. And then if you're doing other types of things. So what is the interconnectivity, and where does Mako provide that efficiency and the cost when you're dealing with so many other vendors? Whose responsibility is it to make sure that those connections are secure, or who has those relationships?
Yeah, so we are really as the network, we're the foundation, and everything's going to run on that foundation. It's got to be absolutely rock solid, reliable, and secure. So whatever kind of technology choices a retailer makes in terms of the number of Wi-Fi access points they want to have, in terms of the number of digital signs that they want to have, in terms of the CCTV that they want to have, It doesn't really matter, but we are kind of the central clearinghouse for all of that in terms of connectivity and enabling that technology to be up and running reliably and securely. And so ultimately, that's the where we want to be is at the sort of, we think of it in terms of this hierarchy of IT needs, right? You can't really think about truly innovating with fancy new robotic technology or all of the other stuff that might be going on unless you've got the lights on. You've got to have that rock solid foundation. It's got to be reliable, it's got to be secure, it's got to be cost effective, and then you can start to build up to sexier technology.
And I think people realize that because in the old days, they used to talk about other types of things as being the foundation, but today you have to have that high speed access both for yourself, your employees, your guests.
Completely.
So you're going to have the access for sure. You've got to have the bandwidth, and you're constantly going to be implementing new things connected to it, a la robotics and things like that. So that tells me that you also have to be scalable. As somebody starts, maybe they start small and maybe it's just a truck somewhere. And I know some people that started in a truck and now they're all over the place with, many different things, or they may still have the truck, but they're out there. So you really actually have to be scalable as well. So how do you address that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important, right? I mean, we've got customers that range from having a single, location to having thousands and thousands of locations. And I think that at the end of the day, you want to really make sure that you've got the same level of control and visibility of one location as you do with thousands of locations. And we've built and kind of baked one of the nice things about the Mako solutions that we build both our hardware as well as all the software. We kind of do it soup to nuts. So we have total control and visibility into everything that's happening with every single piece of equipment through one. I kind of hate the term
from the soup to the nuts. You can see the whole thing.
Exactly, you can see the whole thing,
the whole meal,
central place, because it's all designed and built by the same manufacturer. So that gives us an advantage over, in some cases, people have to kind of daisy chain different systems together in order to get the network stack that they need. But for our customers, what they tell us is that Mako gives us a single network stack that we can have for our brand requirements
in a single device that brings it all together. And then that device can grow as you need it to grow. You just replace it, but it's basically plug and play.
Precisely. And then the other thing, I think, you touched on something earlier about bandwidth. We often see that people will be paying for a certain level of bandwidth, but as they then add more stuff onto their network, they get kind of throttled. And so we've had to, think about ways to not only have, a single device, but different levels of horsepower within that device, if you will. And so we have a range of products that for someone who's looking for high availability or, they've got tons and tons of stuff connected,
right,
they can still do it without sacrificing the speed and performance that they demand.
The word throttle was used. Now, it's interesting because I sometimes hear this when people think about best of breed versus all in one, and they talk about one throat to choke. But on the other hand, if you think about it,
I prefer one hand to shake, Rob.
One hand to shake. Well, now we're going on the positive side here. And as we think about that, you are really the one that shakes a lot of hands because it's coming from inside, outside, from all sides in there. And you are a central point of control and efficiency. Because of that, you're able to do that. So I'm going to guess, because you used the word throttling in there, and I was thinking about throttling in the manner that I wish some restaurants would be throttling if they get too many orders on a certain thing because nobody ever serves it well. But my guess is that the network also senses stuff that you're able to give some feedback to the customer as to whether it's bandwidth, availability, if there's certain things they see. What kinds of things do you bring to help them to operate more efficiently and more effectively?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we've developed is what we call our VPN Cloud Partner Program. And this allows us to have direct connections into some of the commonly used applications that QSRs or other retail operators deploy in their locations. And the way that we set this up is that we actually don't have a central Mako data center that's taking this information and then sort of pushing it out to wherever it may go. There would actually be a direct connection from an individual store location to whatever this application provider is. Maybe it's a payment processor, maybe it's a loyalty processor, something like that. But what it does is
one connection.
Exactly. It eliminates latency and it increases speed of processing because you're taking out a couple of hops where the data needs to go from one place to another, and you're eliminating potential central points of failure. And we've seen over the past, I think the last number I got was 16 years it's been since there was a system-wide outage at Mako, because of the fact that we've deployed this kind of unique architecture that allows us
I
to
would tell you
directly
that there
connect
might have been
redundancy.
system-wide outages on some of the things you were connected to, but it wasn't you, that was there. However, I would expect that most of these connections on a one-to-one, that the person you're connecting to probably has the bandwidth and speed, and they want to see faster transactions, and they
Totally.
want to see more reliable and certainly secure transactions. But it really does come down to speed of service as well.
Yep.
When you're on the front line, and that's something that type of connection is going to enable.
Yeah, and it may only be, it may not necessarily be something the customer's like, oh, I just noticed that it's, a half a second, quicker in terms of processing and all of that in terms of how long it took to put my credit card through there. But you add those transactions up over the course of time, and you start to see a big impact, for the, internal network as well as for the customer experience.
Well, you are going to see us. So, how do you see, just again, some observations or maybe learning from some other industries? But, we're also an industry where people are bringing their own device
Yeah.
and they're connecting in. I'm not necessarily thinking right now about the employee doing or the manager, although that's certainly coming. But, a lot of times your guests are plugged in.
Hmm.
Especially because they're maybe ordering on their own while they're in the unit, ordering more things. So, how do you protect or how do you enable a better flow through directly with the guest?
I think one of the things that's an interesting sort of example that we ran into is that there were customers who would be using a particular operator's loyalty program, but some of their stores were in areas with bad cell signal. And so they'd show up, but they had to log into the app over a connection in order to be able to use the coupons. And what was happening was the customers are showing up, they weren't actually able to use this loyalty program, they're getting frustrated, all of this. So what we actually worked with the customer to do was to deploy some Wi-Fi access points that allowed them to get their guests hooked up, so that when they were in the store, they could
And
actually
recognize when they come in. That's a retail thing you can learn, right?
exactly. Yep. So you can kind of start to, when you've got that connectivity with the customer, you can obviously not only, number one, use the basics like the coupons that are in the apps, but number two, build a stronger connection with them because you're, actually digitally connected with them as well as physically.
Well, more and more we are seeing that the guests in restaurants are much more connected now, with not just for their own use to sit there and go do what they're doing, but actually connected and communicating with the unit itself, while they're sitting there for incremental orders, for loyalty, as you've pointed out.
Yep.
And it's a really a very connected environment today from all sides, that are there.
Well, another
And I think
example is, we've seen people who do have EV charging at their locations, and they put an access point out by the EV charging, because sometimes the risk you run with putting in EV charging is that people will sit there, they plug in their car, they get back in their car, and then they just sort of browse the internet without coming into the store. And so what we've seen some people do is put an access point out there in order to log into the Wi-Fi.
put some interstitial ads in there.
Exactly. Pull them into the
Which, by the
store.
way, you get at the pump now too.
Yep, you get that too. And so, yeah, kind of building that sort of ecosystem where you can start to pull the customers in and actually interact with them, as opposed to some of these things like EV charging, where it's a risk they just show up, use your electricity and then drive off.
So, listen, if I could put you on the spot for a second here, you clearly personally have a lot of experience in this. You've been on both sides. I mean, you've been on the operator side as well as with a number of different vendors, and you understand the connection point of how this is. To what extent do you, in your position, or does the company and its teams actually become a trusted partner to your customers to help advise or suggest things like we're talking about? Because they don't see the world, and you see the world.
Right, absolutely. One of the things, I'm still relatively new to Mako, but one of the things that has really blown me away is the level of engagement and trust and loyalty from the customers that we have. It's really remarkable. And I think when you are a foundational element of their entire system in the network, you have to be dependable, and people come to you and say, well, how is this going to work? How is this going to impact things? Everything runs because of you guys. Help us understand the consequences of this decision. And I think because of the level of depth of knowledge within our organization, we're able to provide people with genuine, feedback that is, time tested and proven, and all of that. And we work very closely with them to help them deploy new solutions as well, when it comes to that. So yeah, I think it's really been great to see that, and I think it's a complicated space. Operators can't be experts in everything, and so we do our best to provide them with as much
Well,
value.
the way I think about it, because I'm getting some keywords in my head from our conversation here, and scalable was one of them. But you're the chief revenue officer, but I would view you as a chief growth partner, that's out there. Because in reality, when you're thinking about what you're doing, I do believe that retailers, that food service people today, even if they're just starting out, even if they're on that truck, they know that they need to have secure networks today because everything that they're using, is not embedded and right there in what they're doing. And so the very fact that you can go from a single unit, scale all the way up, and then let's layer on top of that, I'll assume, since New Zealand perhaps is, not part of the U.S. That's here. I would think that you have the opportunity internationally as well, because we see a lot of people with 2 or 3 units, and all of a sudden they're international, and they're expected to offer the same types of applications. And many applications today are multilingual, and they will work universally. So you're really bringing also that international world to them as well. You're bringing them locations and being able to get to areas that may not be the inner city,
Mhm.
that's there with a lot of things as the access points you just brought up. I mean, it just seems like you really have a easy plug and play solution for just about anybody who's in this industry.
Yeah, and I think you know this as well as anybody. Different parts of the world think about food service and convenience differently. You go to Japan, you see one thing. You come to the US, you see another thing. You go to Europe, you see another thing. And I think what's interesting for us, networking remains foundational wherever you are, right? But we get to see different ways in which operators are innovating and different types of technology that they're deploying. And it's interesting for us to be able to absorb that feedback from different parts of the world, make sure that we're, taking the kind of bleeding edge stuff and incorporating it into our solution so we can future proof it, and stay ahead of, any potential changes that may be rolling out.
Yeah, so I think one last point I'd just like to make sure that we cover here is, because you are a scalable solution and because you're able to manage through a single point and you have very simple plug and play equipment, I've got to think that you're actually helping operators not to have to be technicians or have to be people that are cybersecurity experts
Yeah.
in there. There's got to be operational efficiencies that you're bringing to the table, and how they streamline how they go about deploying and supporting their technology.
Completely. I mean, if you're spending your IT department's time fighting fires, dealing with issues that are coming up because you can't figure out how to get something online, you're really losing the opportunity to add value, help your executive team achieve whatever the business goals are through digital transformation, which is what's required these days. In order to, really be a leading player, you've got to deploy technology because, that's where the efficiency comes from and all of that.
And
So
it has to be frictionless.
completely. Yeah, exactly. Because you can't compromise your employees' experience, you can't compromise your customers' experience, but you've got to integrate these new things. So yeah, absolutely. We take a lot of pride in the fact that sometimes we call up our customers and we say, hey, can we set up our quarterly business review? And they said, we got nothing to talk about. Your solution just works. Save your time. And that's a good thing for us to hear. Sometimes we force our way into the office anyway to make sure that we're really, hearing the things that are coming down the pipe in terms of some of their business priorities. But, that's a position that we're very proud of. To be the one that's not causing any problems because it allows them to focus on the stuff higher up where
Well,
they're
maybe they should have
making
the
meaningful
business
impact.
reviews with you to understand how to grow their business,
Sure, there you go.
instead of the business review of how are you doing,
Right.
right?
Right. Well, we'd love to be there. That's the sort of partner that we want to be. Is what can we do to enable and unlock your growth goals? As an operation.
Well, listen, you're certainly bringing a very important aspect to the IFBTA as well. And we talk about partnership, and you're an industry supporter partner. But what is it? How are you? Well, I know you're a couple of months into the job, but how does Mako Networks see its relationship, and why the IFBTA?
Well, look, I think that organizations like IFBTA are very important. I think members are hungry for knowledge. They're hungry for connection. They're hungry to understand how they can improve their business. And organizations like yours do a great job bringing together people, and bringing together resources and providing them with new ways of thinking about things so they can stay competitive in what's a very competitive environment, this food and beverage space. And so we're really pleased to be a part of that. We hope that we can, lend our voice to the discussion, obviously build out, our network and connections in the space. But I think that, these days, it's really about, genuine connection and genuine educational content for people. And you guys do a great job of bringing that to the industry. So we appreciate it.
Well, I think that's a very good way to say it, that, we're all in the food service industry, so I know they're hungry, but I would suspect that as they satisfy their hunger or quench their thirst for knowledge and information with all of the different things that are available to them in the technology world, that Mako Networks is certainly there to, help them to go away from the meal satisfied.
Absolutely. Well, we're thrilled to be a part of it, and we're looking forward to being so for many years to come.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the support. It's been a pleasure to have a conversation today with Jon Kelly, the Chief Revenue Officer of Mako Networks, an industry supporter member of the IFPTA, and a very important part of the ecosystem of bringing technology to the guests, to the employees, and to the industry in general, and all of our connecting points. So thank you for joining me, and thank you for being a member of the IFPTA.
Thank you, Rob. Really, really appreciate it.